So I first heard about transhumanism a few years back at a sort of libertarian-leaning conference, and a few people got on stage. They said that we have the opportunity to end aging, basically, and I guess by combining humans with machines, we never have to die. And I thought that was a little interesting, a little odd. I didn't really think much of it. A few years later, Ben Barty, who's on the call with me here, writes for the Daily Bell and has his own blog, which we'll, of course, link to. He started writing about transhumanism in a little bit more of a negative light. And then I'm also joined by Nicholas Creed, who has his Substack. We'll also link to that as well. Help me understand a little bit more about the dangers of transhumanism, or even if I understand what the term means.
Well, like you said, my understanding of transhumanism basically is that it's the use of technology to transcend humanity to become something other than what we are limited to being by our biology. Basically, like installing the idea that human biology can be overcome with technology.
Nick, is that basically how you understand it as well?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. My understanding also historically is that the transhumanist agenda has some roots in eugenics as well, meaning the more sinister side of it is those that are pushing transhumanism are selling will be or are selling it to the public as augmentation to make a more superior race. And I think that's particularly being pushed hard on the back of all the constant virus scare. The next thing is around the corner, the Marburg, monkeypox, you name it. Everything that is being engineered at a socio-behavioral level is instilling the message that we're fragile, we're weak and we're fragile humans, making us give a stronger sense of our own mortality. And I think that's going to get stronger and stronger with how they'll try to push it. But last time I spoke about this mind-blowing document from a government think tank from the government of Canada. So this government think tank document was from Policy Horizons. And the buzzword within transhumanism at the moment is something called biodigital convergence. I think you linked to that last time, Joe, but it was a piece written by James Corbett. So maybe this time we can link to the source document. So I'll just recap on that definition. Biodigital convergence is the interactive combination, sometimes to the point of merging, of digital and biological technologies with systems. And that sets the stage really for biological brains in synthetic bodies, synthetic brains in biological bodies, and so on and so forth. Very dystopian stuff.
Yeah, it definitely sounds dystopian. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to add, if you listen to World Economic Forum conferences, they'll often talk about these strange new biotech machinations that they have. Like the one I just thought of is the Pfizer CEO was, I believe he was at the WEF.
Albert Bourla, yeah.
Albert Bourla, who's not even a doctor, by the way. He was a veterinarian before he got into the biomedical industry. Which I think is relevant because that's how he views people. It's basically as animals to be experimented on. He was talking about this brand new technology that they have, or they're in the process of developing, which is they like add nanoparticles to drugs, and then when you take them, they send the message back to Pfizer or whoever to prove that you actually took the drugs you're supposed to take. They have all of these different like interfaces with human biology, and they almost all have like some element of social control to them.
So the problem with this technology is that somebody from outside of your own body can control it. So I obviously see that problem. If you have, we touched on briefly last time, Elon Musk's Neuralink, and obviously I would, if it restores sight to somebody that's blind, I would say they're probably, it would be worth it to kind of put themselves at that risk. I wouldn't personally, if nothing's wrong with you, why would you want to put yourself at risk for a hacker or something to get into your brain? But what if, isn't there a world where we could control this ourselves? It's like the open source biohacking where, whatever technologies, if you control much like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies where you can have your own hardware wallet with the seed or whatever, if you can control the technology that you're putting into yourself, once again, I see how this could be used. Anything could be used to create a dystopian world. I see how the government would use this to try to control people. But what's the problem with individuals just using this to enhance their eyesight, enhance their brain power, think quicker?
Yeah, I'll let me field that one. So yeah, since the last chat we had, and you playing devil's advocate, I realized that I am very anti-transhuman to the point where I said before I'm in danger of being that guy that doesn't embrace new technology just because of my inherent bias and belief system and because of how much I dislike the transhumanist movement. But you make a valid point. If someone was told by a doctor, either genetically or neurodegeneratively, that they're going to lose their sight or their mental faculties will be impaired because of some disease, but they could help that with a neuro implant, I understand the appeal. Who wouldn't go for that? But the privacy issues are the inherent problem. I've read a really good piece from Spartacus, quite a popular writer on Substack. He's been going deep dive on the transhumanist stuff. And on this point of ethics, he said, there needs to be a public conversation about synthetic biology and neurotechnology right now. And there need to be policies enacted that strictly define international and binding limits for its use. If not, then the human beings of the future will inevitably be reduced to engineered products. So yeah, I like the idea of what would a decentralized open source version of that look like? I mean, could you have some kind of seed phrase to your own defense from being hacked or controlled or manipulated with your thoughts and your behavior and your beliefs or even your memories? Yeah, it's very strange even talking about it because this has all just been science fiction up until recently, right? What do you think, Ben?
Sorry, I was going to ask, is this the same thing as like genetic manipulation? I saw recently that the Chinese are trying to create some sort of soldiers that aren't susceptible to radiation. Would that be also considered transhumanism, or is that something different?
I think when I conceptualize it and when most people do, you think of like a human cyborg with like, metallic arms.
RoboCop.
Yeah, RoboCop. But I mean, if you want to get real like lawyerly about it, glasses are a form of biotechnology. Almost anything that you use to enhance like your senses or anything to like aid in biological function is a form of technology. Also, another question is like, at what point, if you alter human physiology or psychology with technology, at what point does a person not become like something else besides a person?
But it seems like we're kind of still come to this point where it's like there's a limit to these things. You said glasses obviously are okay, contact lenses, cataract surgery. So this seems to be, to me, like an arbitrary limit on when this gets out of hand. If at some point humans and machines merge to the point where the human is no longer in existence, or it's a totally different species, is that the worst thing? Could you see that as a step in evolution in terms of leveling up? Just like natural selection chose bigger brains over, tree climbing skills. Couldn't the same sort of thing happen with merging with technology?
I'll jump in. So first of all, because we're still stuck on the definition, I think it's easiest to talk about the mission creep because we haven't got anything to compare this with, philosophically or historically. All we have is our imaginations and popular culture. So Ben was talking about our friend Klaus, and it was way back when in 2015, I think we can throw in the link when he talked about wearables, smart wearables, right? Your smartwatch, the ring that measures your heart rate and your blood oxygenation when you sleep and whatnot. And he said, eventually the smart gadgets will become you. The fourth industrial revolution will be inside you. So, I see lots of people that love their smartwatch, they love their Aura ring that measures things, and I can see the appeal. I think it's cool, but I wonder how much of a stretch is it before well, yeah, if I have the chip, Albert Bourla's chip, I can just tell the pharmacy when I'm sick and send the meds over. That's the mission creep. And then as far as the legalities, seeing as you invoke RoboCop, I'll invoke a classic dystopian transhumanist film, Ghost in the Shell. If you haven't seen it, great film. The original is a Japanese animation, and then there was a so-so version with Scarlett Johansson from a few years ago, live action. And that is transhumanism on steroids. So the characters will casually say to each other, how much of your natural body is actually left? Because they're so heavily augmented, ballistic, weaponization. They refer to it as the ghost being the human consciousness, the spirit, the residual soul that is left inside this titanium shell that they've got. And you guys were talking about the state actors. So there's a whole plot within the film that revolves around the bad guy hacking people's brains. And it's such a new world even for them. You can see that it's all happened so quickly that they hardly have the technology or the means to combat it. And then you've got different state departments vying for control over the secrecies of the latest encryption or technology on how to bypass literally people's brains. And again, Ben rightly said, I can't remember his name, the right-hand man of Klaus, he said, the humans are hackable animals. We are not mysterious beings anymore.
Yuval Noah Harari.
That's the guy, yeah. Very, very creepy man.
I just want to add real quick, speaking of dystopian science fiction, I meant to mention this earlier when we were like on the definition. The founder of transhumanist ideology is credited as Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother, the author of Brave New World. Julian Huxley was an evolutionary biologist, and he was the first Director General of UNESCO, the United Nations agency. So I think that's like relevant information.
That is interesting. I wanted to bring up this book that I'm reading called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self: Cultural Amnesia, Expressive Individualism, and the Road to Sexual Revolution. And this actually ties, it doesn't talk so much about transhumanism as it does about transgenderism, which again, we've already linked and I think is definitely a relevant part of the conversation. The idea that we have moved on based on basically Freud's work, and Freud set this tone for society in which sexual becoming the truest form of ourself sexually has become the ultimate goal of humanity. Basically, the book is arguing that we've lost our spirituality and care, and have moved on to more animal concepts of who we are. And that's basically what Freud laid the foundation. Everything goes back to sex, and which is why you see sex being such a key part of the culture wars right now. because everybody's identity is related to sexual preferences. That's what it all comes back to. And you have, on the one hand, these activists claiming that sex is a private matter and it only matters, what they do in their own homes is their own business, except that then they bring it out into public and say, you have to identify me in a certain way based on who I am as a sexual being. And so I see this is as related from the concept of transgenderism. It doesn't matter what the biological reality is. They say on the inside, I feel like this gender. And so therefore everybody else has to accept me as that. Could you, I don't know if you guys want to comment that or explain how transgenderism is linked to transhumanism. I kind of see it, but I'm not 100%.
I guess it's well, if we invoke another, this was a TV series that I've linked in before on something I wrote, BBC Years and Years, and there's a scene where this young girl, she's in the home with her parents, and they're all sat down. She says, "Mum, Dad, I've got something to tell you. I'm trans." And they're all like, "Oh, it's okay. We're here for you, sweetheart." And they say something that obviously insinuates that they think she's coming out as transgender. And then she says, "No, I don't mean like that. Transhuman." And she goes on to say that she wants to have her consciousness uploaded into the cloud and get rid of this horrible meat suit and just be digital. So maybe, yeah, it's very difficult to put your finger on it and articulate, like you said, Joe, but I think it basically means people are going to start identifying as things that we've not even comprehended or imagined yet in this biodigital convergence realm where everything doesn't make sense to us because it's all new. And there's going to be a whole other new bunch of labels that people will start declaring that they are, and maybe they'll even be able to do that through physical and digital augmentation.
Ben, anything to add about how the transgender issue relates to transhumanism?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot you could say. I do think it's a way to condition the public to either accept or at the very least like not push back against more extreme versions of transhumanist ideology in the future. It's like, I think a lot of it's about replacing objective observations of reality with the subjective, So you were saying like it goes from the private to the public. It's so annoying when trans activists try to say like, we just want to live our lives the way we want to live, and we just, like if you are critical of transgender ideology, you're like, you don't want me to exist. That's one of their favorite lines. They frame, if there's legislation, for instance, against like grooming children in public school and like putting them on life-altering hormone blockers or puberty blockers, even before the hormone blockers or the artificial hormones. I mean, if you're critical of any of that, they say, oh, you just don't want trans people to exist. So there's all of this like rhetorical trickery that they do. But they really are like forcing it into the public conversation. I mean, look at like the LGBTQ plus Pride Month every month in June. It's a whole month of that wall-to-wall transgender propaganda. So it's like very much a public, there's clearly like a public social engineering element to it. And I think a lot of it's about setting the stage so that there's less resistance. At some point, of course, it won't even matter what people think because it'll be so ingrained. It'll already be an established practice. Various transhumanist procedures or technologies. It'll be like ubiquitous, and it won't even matter what people think. But to the extent that public opinion still matters at all in politics, I think it's about conditioning people to accept transhumanist ideology, even if they don't know what transhumanism means exactly. They absorb the idea that you can become something other than what you are. And when you do that, like other people are forced to interact with you and to see you like how you want to be seen, or
Yeah.
otherwise
So
they're hateful things.
what matters most is what I feel on the inside. That becomes the reality, and then everybody else around me has to adhere by that reality, as opposed to biological truths, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's very postmodern.
And
So would
so I'm
it?
starting to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say everything that you said. Then both of you, it really echoed of what I've been reading. This mainly been happening in the States, to be fair, but definitely imported into the UK. Would it stand to reason that in the future we will see headlines and history repeating itself with things like child gets augmented without parental consent? It sounds crazy, but I could see that kind of thing happening,
So
where
actually,
they would have transhumanist guest speakers. I don't know what's going to be the future equivalent of the mRNA shot. You know, could it be an interface, an implant, and the kid has already been talking with their peers and they think it's really cool. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to be transhuman, but my mum and dad probably won't let me. So I guess I'll just sneakily get something done. I'll get some work done at school next week. It's probably going to happen, isn't it?
certainly how the communists tend to do this, right? I mean, we've had these communist revolutions for over 100 years now, and they obviously, try to get the children first. So whether it's a groomer problem from the personal sexual standpoint of the individuals involved, or whether this is a broader social problem, access, who is putting these ideas in the heads of kids is clearly a problem. I personally think
Yeah,
this is a problem that people already have a lot of control over. I mean, especially in the United States, you can homeschool. You don't have to send your
homeschooling.
kids to
Yeah,
public school, unschool, exactly. Like, so
you're right.
the connection that I'm starting to see between transgenderism and transhumanism is related to like sports, for example. So, there's an obvious biological difference between men and women, and that's why we have different sports competitions. A lot of trans people have even tried to start denying that. I've seen these activists arguing that there's no biological difference, which is just absurd and anti-science. So I don't know how, but anyway, that's another subject. So same thing with transhumans, right? You get augmented to a certain point, and then you want to compete in a sport, and that's not fair, which is already actually the case. And it's a little interesting, right? So you have people who have lost limbs and they get replaced. The Blade Runner, remember?
Yeah, the
That's
South African guy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're faster than people with their limbs because they're using these bouncy spring blades where their legs are supposed to be. Now, obviously, that's not their fault, and they're competing in a different category, which I think is the point. But there are some things where you can't separate that competition, like general society, getting jobs, living your life. I feel like the problem comes back to these shared spaces without shared values. And if you had, so you're fighting over what public schools teach. And it's like, well, if you didn't have public schools, then everybody could decide what they want to teach on their own. If you're fighting over, things that happen in public, it's like, well, the public space needs to be inhabited by people that share the same values. So is this it? Is the future segregation?
That's a great point. That with the sport thing, yeah. Again, I'm seeing the parallels too now. So begrudgingly, when I was flicking through woke flicks, I mean Netflix, I came across some animation, I think it's called Cyberpunk or something. And I watched like 5 minutes of it, and it's a bunch of teenagers at school, and it's, you know, 5, 10 years ahead, whatever, where they're all getting enhanced. And basically, this kid, he starts suffering from getting bullied and getting left out, and he hasn't got the same competitive athletic edge because he's just a bog standard human. His friends are all taking the piss out of him, and he basically I think he does something behind his mum's back, and he just starts getting more and more modified by the looks of it, so he can run faster and jump higher and be stronger. So I guess that's definitely how they'll get the youth, through making them feel like they're the weird one for remaining Homo sapien. Peer pressure, right? That's how they'll wear them down until, like Ben said, horrible thought, but yeah, it just becomes normalized and institutionalized. Perish the thought.
I can see a role for social media influencers, like transhumanist social media influencers, you know, like getting paid by whatever biotech company to show off the latest, you know, piece of biotech that whatever they're trying to sell to the public. So
Yeah,
I
with it
don't
all
know.
in getting augmented just for clicks and for dollars, that's gonna be weird.
There's a whole genre my wife likes to show me. It seems most common among Eastern European women for some reason. Like the things these women do to their faces in the name of beauty is astounding. Some of them don't. It's like hard to believe they're even human when you look at them. Like
Madonna,
the lips,
how
they
much of
do
her
these
is
lip
human?
things. They're like 10 times the size of normal human lips, and somehow they think that it's sexy, apparently.
Well, even worse than that, in Bangkok, uh, it's been freaking me out with the whole meta-human stuff. I'm going to take some pictures of it so Joe can link to it somehow. So I was walking past the MRT, right? That's the tube, the underground transit system. There's this massive poster of this girl, this Asian girl, quite attractive. I thought, oh, who's that? Must be some celebrity. And then I looked closer. I said, alien, metahuman, meet her in the metaverse. I thought, oh my days. I almost fell for thinking that a metahuman was hot. And I've just seen it creeping in everywhere on adverts for all sorts of products, whether it's some fizzy drink. There'll be these characters and real humans, and they've got all these sort of metal suits. They look like they're something out of Halo. And it'll have tag words, buzzwords to seed this in the consciousness of the public about cyber this and meta that. It's quite insidious when you think about it, but I guess most people don't think about it. They just think it's cool, and when the time comes, they'll probably be all in on getting upgraded.
I
So
used to hear I used to hear conservatives like way back in the day talk about piercing and tattooing as like some form of like their basic point was like it was used to normalize body modification so that in the future more extreme body modification would be um, like more socially accepted. I used to think it was crazy, but now I think they might have been onto something.
Well,
so
that's really interesting.
you have piercings. I have piercings, tattoos. You have tattoos as well.
Yeah, I have tattoos as well.
Yeah. So
Everyone has tattoos now. It's not even like
So we're already transhuman, guys. God damn it.
we're already on the road.
well, so let's. So I want to kind of like I like to like organize things in my own mind, So clearly there's a limit. We're not all against glasses, and clearly we see like where the government is going with this. So the government's trying to normalize this because they think it's going to be a method of control. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that there? So now, we talked about this with AI, 15-minute cities. You can shut off people's access to bank accounts, etc. That AI tool makes it easier for the government to do that. And I said, maybe AI tools can make it easier for people to resist that. So with transhumanism, is the government thinks that this is going to be another way that they can control humanity, or is there a goal beyond that?
Yes, 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 absolutely. It is definitely a part of the multifaceted subjugation and the neo-feudalism they want to usher in on the back of the CBDCs, the universal basic income. Um, Let me read you this extract from that document again, Policy Horizons on Biodigital Convergence, because this is quite apt. So this is a little piece they've got halfway in about hypothetical life of someone that's just all in on all this stuff. So it says, while I'm brushing my teeth, Jamie, my personal AI, asks if I'd like a delivery drone to come pick up my daughter's baby tooth, which fell out 2 days ago. The epigenetic markers in children's teeth have to be analyzed and catalogued on our family genetic blockchain in order to qualify for the open health rebate. So I need to get that done today. And then it goes on about smart stickers he's got monitoring his blood chemistry, his lymphatic system, his organ function in real time. And, they'll be pushing for all that stuff to be linked directly to your insurance policy. So I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, we'll have to link to that and people can read it for themselves and see how dystopian it is.
Once again, though, looking at your biomarkers to try to prevent a disease itself isn't a bad thing. When the government mandates it and can cut you off from health services, that's a bad thing. I just wonder if there's, with the AI thing, it's easy for me because I say, I'm going to use AI to combat the government using AI. Transhumanism is a little different. Like, I'm not willing to get a brain implant just because everybody else is getting a brain implant and I need to keep up with the arms race. So I already admit that it's a totally different thing. I guess what I'm wondering is the government correct that these technological advances can only go one direction for them, which is giving them more control? I have a feeling that they thought the internet was going to give them more control as well, because it was going to give them more avenues to distribute propaganda. And I think that completely backfired on them. I think the internet has given individuals more power, and you see that by the fact that people are watching us and listening to us right now. We don't have a TV channel, but I have a YouTube channel and a website. So that's given me, more power.
Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, yeah, my working theory for everything all the time is that if the government is in favor of something, there's some social control element to it that they're pursuing. That's almost always a safe assumption, I think. It's served me well. I know that's also your disposition.
Correct. Yes.
But
yeah, we're from the government. We're here to help, right?
Yeah.
The internet is like an anomaly, it would seem, because the internet was invented and propagated by the U.S. Defense Department. So it's very much a government creation. And it seems to have undermined their, grasp on narrative control, because people like us are allowed to talk on the internet about the government. So it is strange. Ultimately, of course, the internet could prove to be the most valuable social control tool they've ever invented if they can manage to, the Restrict Act. That's a whole nother can of worms. It's not the topic we're talking about, but people should look up what the Restrict Act does. It hasn't passed yet, but it's very, very, very close in the U.S. And it basically gives the government the power to shut down anyone on the internet on the flimsiest of evidence that they're doing something subversive. So it could in the end be, and then, if they have control of the internet and they have this grid of social control, it could
the internet of bodies.
Yeah. I'm
very skeptical that the government is competent enough to do anything. I look at I like to look at the parallels with history, and one huge one was the Catholic Church's dominance in the Middle Ages, which actually at the beginning of the Middle Ages, coming out of the Dark Ages, it was very beneficial. They restored some semblance of order. By the time 1500 rolled around, its net impact had become negative because it was this big behemoth government basically of Europe that superseded governments and superseded the decentralized, competition among states basically. And if you looked in the 1500s, it just looked like the church's power was growing. There was a new regulation every day. They forced people to spend more and more time in church and observing more and more holidays. Actually, as we're recording this, it's Good Friday, and on Fridays during Lent, it used to be every Friday you weren't supposed to eat meat; you're supposed to eat fish. It's because the churches actually owned the fisheries. It was a regulation that favored their own industry, much like a lot of the government regulations today. They're benefiting themselves. But it didn't continue going in that one direction. The power that the Catholic Church had, they took too much. They affected people's lives too much. And they were so full of shit that people started to see how obvious it was that no, you can't just buy indulgences and get out of hell free card. I see the same sort of thing happening right now, where yes, the government's power, and when I say government, I'm not just talking about the U.S. government, or we're talking about the World Economic Forum. We're talking about all these interconnected systems of control. Their power does appear to be more than it's ever been, but sometimes that happens right before the collapse. And the more ridiculous they get, you ban encryption. Is encryption banned, or is it go underground? And does some country somewhere say, well, we support encryption? Does that become the new go-to place for technology? Everybody's familiar with why Singapore is a rich, prosperous, small country, because they embraced capitalism, essentially.
I see a really interesting parallel in Russia to what you just said. Russia, when it invaded Ukraine last year, the U.S. cut Russia out of SWIFT, and that was to hear the propagandists at the White House press briefing and stuff. They said this is gonna really mess Russia up. They're cut out of the system now. They're gonna collapse soon. There's gonna be a coup. None of that happened. What happened was Russia got super innovative. They were forced to find alternative ways to generate revenue, and now they're trading in Chinese. They're selling their oil to China in the Chinese currency, making as much or more money off of their oil than they were before. It doesn't matter that they're cut out of the SWIFT system. They have their own payment system now with China. So like what you're saying, the government exerted this massive, they did this massive power move, and it totally backfired on them.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
To both of your points, with Joe's point, it's kind of sounds like talking about every totalitarian regime that has ever been and gone. In the end, there is this government overreach, and then the centralized structures crumble from within because people just automatically gravitate towards the decentralized versions, whether that's underground on the arts and education. That's just the way it goes. So we've talked so much about all of the crazy worst case stuff on the transhumanist, but on the human side, again, Joe's talking about you've got the option to pull your kid out of school and homeschool them. I mean, that within itself may well grow into a real pro-human movement. And there was this piece that was quite good that I read on Zero Hedge today, by Bruce Abramson via Real Clear Wire, and it's called Pity the Child. And I'll just read you the last paragraph. He said, because childhood is when we shape our beliefs and our tastes, convince a generation that it's fragile, off balance, angry, victimized, and oppressed, and very few of its members will ever break out. So I think there's going to be a real resistance to the transhumanist movement because, like Ben said, with all the parallels with the transgenderism, they're going to go for the youth, they're going to go for the kids, the schools, the colleges, they're all just indoctrination centers. I think parents are going to start waking up to that, and people hopefully will see the parallels between the transgenderism and the transhumanist ideology on how they try to get at the kids. So maybe we'll see, like your project, Joe, the parallel economy. Education is just one part of that, isn't it? I mean, it could be homeschooling, or it could be maybe a bunch of parents that get together and they split the cost of a tutor, and they would be instilling traditional values, and ethics, real right and wrong, innovation, creativity, being, individualism, not the opposite, which is homogenous thought, group consensus, which inevitably makes people and kids much more susceptible to transhumanism.
I think on that point, it seems pretty clear to me that the world is trending towards decentralization. There's been a long period of centralization, and it seems like the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. So again, to look in the historical context, in the industrial era, you need large governments and large armies to defend large industrial bases. Now, if we're moving into the information era, that inherently pushes decentralization because it's more of an information economy and less of a physical economy. I think that's one of the reasons that, you see the world sort of decentralizing as it is. Like, do you think, the United States and the United States dollar as the global reserve currency is basically what Ben was just talking about, where, they thought, because they've had this global reserve currency since World War II, and they've been bullying people with it since World War II, and that worked while the United States had all the power after Europe was destroyed from World War II, and all the industrial base was in the United States. They could do that. They could bully people with their dollar. That's gone on for a long time. It lost its inherent value in the 70s when it got taken off the gold standard. It's been weaponized to the point that people say, it's insane that the United States forced Russia's hand to get off of the system. It was still on board, even though, despite the fact that they were, antagonizing each other, it was still on board with holding American reserves and being a part of the American system. And it was a complete miscalculation, maybe, or maybe it was intentional, another subject. But, it caused more of this bifurcation, more decentralization. So that's part of the reason I'm not as worried, because I think when things decentralize like this,
the hubris is the downfall.
Exactly. And when things decentralize, you have compartments, and when you compartmentalize, is there going to be a society that goes way too far with transhumanism? Definitely. Is there going to be people that get hacked? Absolutely. If we had one world government and they mandated it, that would affect every single individual on Earth. If we have thousands of world governments, or ideally, 8 billion, every individual is their own authority. That's a whole nother debate. I say these things, you need to add so much context to the things that you say. But anyway, the decentralization is why I'm not worried.
At some point, we should have a whole podcast about
political philosophy.
Individual versus the state, what the state actually means in the information age. Stuff like that.
You're right. We should do that
economy.
because, then we can start from a standpoint. I like when we can, link back to a conversation that we've had if we've already covered a topic, and kind of have that be a primer, so that when I say these things, you don't have to feel like you have to explain like 10 years of political transformation of why I think that the world could perfectly function with 8 billion individuals, being their own authority. But that's basically, I'm going to stop there from my perspective of like why I'm not as worried about the transhumanism thing, even though I think I see the problems that it'll create, and it will absolutely have trouble. But the decentralization and the where I see the world going is why I'm not worried.
So in closing, I would again just like to revisit the humanity side, which is the opposite of the transhumanist agenda. And I think the same goes if we draw parallels from the state of the world now since the scamdemic. People are more and more isolated than they've ever been. They're being told that to focus on their mental health when we are the ones that have caused that and accepted it in our acquiescence to everything that's happened the past 3 years. All people really want is human interaction and connection. That's what I believe. That would help people to rediscover their lost humanity. And I see the transhumanist agenda as basically pushing more distance between humans biodigital convergence is exactly as it sounds. Metaverses, everything being done remotely, augmentation. It's less and less intimacy, it's less and less connection. So that's why, personally, I will reject it in all of its forms. And I would like to think in the future, if we keep on doing these explorations, then maybe within your parallel economy project, Joe, there'll be some kind of toolkit on how people can resist the push for transhumanism and how they can turn to decentralized systems. We don't know exactly what that'll look like, but I guess it'll be pretty simple. It'll just be being human.
I think it'll be the pendulum swinging back towards humanity in terms of like you get to choose your village. There's times in the past where you're born into a village, born into a family. I think we're coming to the stage where you'll be able to choose that. And when you're around those like-minded people, you will find that community.
When Nick was talking, I thought of the Charlie Chaplin speech from The Great Dictator. I think it was called or maybe just The Dictator, this old movie. But you're not a machine, you're a man. Anyway, you should go watch that speech if you haven't seen it. It's really excellent. And about the pendulum point, yeah, it's possible that the pendulum will swing in favor of individual liberty as opposed to collectivized or state power. But of course, the question is how much damage could be done in the meantime and how much of that is irreversible. So like, for instance, the mRNA shots, lying corporate fact checkers claim that it's not a gene therapy, but it absolutely is a gene therapy. It goes into your cells and it reprograms them to produce a very specific protein. That's totally genetic engineering. And that is only going to accelerate. So at some point, yeah, the pendulum could swing back, but the question is how much damage is going to be done to the human DNA even in the meantime, and could that be reversed at some point in the future, or if not reversed, could it be like remedied somehow? And I don't think that the answer to that question is obvious.
I think that's a great point, because we've had this nuclear conversation as well, and there's clearly the argument to be made that more damage occurs from nuclear bombs before we can move beyond it. So you're right. We can't just ignore the dangers and assume that everything will resolve itself in the end. So this is an interesting conversation. Once again, it feels like it opens up more questions than provides answers. But I mean, that's the point, right? Of discussion to try to.
That's the way it always works. If you're willing to be like intellectually open and honest, that's the way it always works. There's always more questions than answers that you end up with.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
So maybe next time we get down to the roots of political philosophy. And what do you guys think? Have a conversation about whether Ben's still an anarchist, and what are you, Nicholas?
Yeah, what are you, Nick?
I don't know. I guess kind of a nomadic existence for me, living in Thailand. Yeah, I don't really identify as any particular political affiliation. What's that?
When you're an expat, you're totally like an alien, like you're almost something else besides like, you're still a subject of the state, but you're like somehow separate,
Yeah, no, you've got no rights here as a foreigner. I just had to report to immigration today. Every 90 days, they've got to know your whereabouts. So, yeah, I'm an alien, but not an illegal one, for the record.
Yeah.
But yeah, I look forward to exploring the individual versus the state.
Yeah, that optionality. I mean, we're all living in 3 different countries, and a territory right now. So having those options plays into that conversation as well. But we'll end it there before we get into a whole another hour-long discussion about this, and that'll be for next time. So obviously, links below. You can check out all those links, and definitely subscribe if you want to hear more of these conversations. That's the way to do it. And Even better than subscribing is joining the email list below, because obviously, YouTube, there's no guarantee that they'll continue to let us have these conversations. You can watch this not on YouTube. Maybe you already are. Odyssey, again, links below. But thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us, and come back and see us again soon.